Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, both in live stream land and right here in San Pedro. My name is Richard Foss, and I'm the Executive Director of Collage. We'd like to start this program with an acknowledgement that we are on Tongva land, that we are among the descendants of that living people who are still making new art and new work in their living language. We have had Tongva representatives here who have given a fantastic program about that, and we hope to have them again. Many languages have been spoken in California. Many languages are spoken in Los Angeles. Many languages will be spoken in Los Angeles. And authors who are trying to portray people who move between those communities have an interesting balancing act. They need to explain just enough about that community so that people who aren't familiar with it will be able to enjoy it, but they need to not do so much that it seems like you're reading a textbook. We have with us today a trio of authors who themselves move between cultures and write characters who move between the cultures. From the right here, we have Maria Amparo Escandron. She writes from the Mexican-American community. Mr. William F. Wu, who writes from the Chinese-American community perspective. And Naomi Hirahara, who writes from the Japanese community perspective. I'm going to ask them each to start by talking a little bit about their work and about their own attitude toward writing about characters who move between cultures and who are bilingual. So, Maria, please let us know.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you so much for inviting me to this presentation. I'm very excited to be here. And in answer to your question, yes, I can't help it because I myself move between cultures and are bicultural, Mexican and American. I have lived in LA for nearly 40 years. I'm on my 39th year living here, so I have lived here more than anywhere else, even though I was born and raised in Mexico City, and I consider myself Mexican as well. So I'm very proudly Mexican and American. And all my writing is about people moving between cultures. I have 3 novels published, and they all have characters that either migrate from Mexico to the US, or in the case of Gonzalez and Daughter Trucking Company, the second book is a father-daughter trucking story, and they go everywhere, all 48 states. Of course, they don't go to Hawaii or Alaska. In my third novel, LA Weather, this is the third novel is the novel where I really pay homage to LA, to my adopted city, and the city that has been so generous with me, that this is where I have thrived. I arrived here penniless, completely ignorant of what I was doing. I had this delusional idea that I was going to start an ad agency for the Latino community. I was 23, I had no money, no clients, no credit, no place to live, but I was set on it, and I did it. And I did it because of the generosity of my people, of this city. And so a tribute to all of this is LA Weather, which is this family story of this Mexican-American family who are the parents, and then they have 3 adult daughters, and they're all professionals. They all have careers, and they're all successful. But of course, you know, if everything is wonderful, then there's nothing to write about. And so things start to unravel in their lives, and that's the story. And I'm not going to get into details, but this family, the mother is a Mexican Jew first generation, who came to LA as an exchange student, fell in love with the man she married, who is the character, the male character in the story, and he is Mexican American, but his family had lived in Los Angeles since before California was part of the US, since when it was still part of Mexico. So he didn't cross the border crossed him. And this is this mix of family where we have Judaism, Catholicism, Mexican American, fifth or sixth generation, and then we have Mexican first generation. So the process of acculturation is very different. Oscar, the father, hardly speaks any Spanish, whereas Kayla hardly, has learned English as an adult, and so she struggles with that. And raising her daughters in the U.S. with her own upbringing in Mexico is very confusing to her. And so she really struggles with that part of motherhood. And I've seen it 1,000 times, and it happened to me, with my kids, soccer mom, what do you mean? It must be soccer dad, right? Or, what? You want to sleep over with where? No, forget it. You're going to sleep at home until you get married, Missy, So it's very difficult for someone who grew up in a different culture and then comes here and raises kids in the U.S. because everything changes, the values, the way kids are brought up. And, I remember watching my kids with all their friends just walking right past me, straight to the fridge, plowing through everything in there, and don't even say hello. What? Adults, we command respect. What are you talking about? So it's very interesting when you have a mix of cultures and different levels of acculturation. So in this novel, the characters, the girls, grow up as American kids. And so sometimes they don't understand their mother because they say, Mom, we don't do these kind of things here, It's like, why do you want to go away to college? You have your room here, and I don't understand why you want to leave. So for Mexican parents, it's like that.
One thing just in the introduction that I would like to ask is, are all of your works contemporary society rather than historical society?
Yes. Esperanza's Box of Saints, that was my first novel. That one is contemporary. They're all contemporary. Okay. It's a Mexican woman from a sleepy village who travels to the U.S. and
don't need to go into the whole thing. I just wanted to check in general because of the fact that I know that our other two panelists have both written some things with historical characterizations, which gives another layer of difficulty for a writer of portraying not only across culture but across time. Bill, could you talk a little about that in your introduction?
Sure. I'm mostly a writer of science fiction and fantasy, and when I started, I deliberately planned to have some stories that were about ethnic and cultural matters, and some where the ethnic character is just part of the gang. And there's usually some cultural reference in that, but I wanted to make sure that I was writing both. And for instance, I have a composite novel made up of 10 short stories called A Temple of Forgotten Spirits. But in this, I use ghost stories as a vehicle to take the reader into various stages of Chinese American history. And so this is part of what you're asking about. I have a character who, in interacting with ghosts from different periods of American history, we see different places across the country and different eras that each of the ghost characters deal with. I also have one story. It's part fantasy. It's also a murder mystery. It appeared in a crime anthology. but it's one of the few where I actually set a story in the past. That's in the frontier era in a place called Panamint in the Panamint Mountains. Rough place to get to. I've never been there. I've seen video of people getting there. I don't think I'll ever get there. But there were Chinese workers who built a big retaining wall in the area. And of course, as immigrants, they were interacting with the people who hired them and the other people who lived there. So I've been using this kind of thing all the way along. I don't usually write about nuclear families, and I was thinking about that in response to the questions. But part of it is because in going back to stories in Chinatowns, for instance, there was a huge imbalance until the 1960s. Too many guys and not enough women. And in Oregon and California, there were laws against interracial marriage. And so a lot of my stories have been about what some people call a bachelor society. How did guys get along in this life? And of course, there were some families. So how did the families get by?
All right. And I know that you, Naomi, have also, as I remember, you have written both contemporary and, is it some pieces set in the United States just after World War II, or is that? Please talk about your work in general and the
Sure.
way that you write about characters.
Sure. Just in general, I just, in response, Maria just explained like her personal experience with bilingualism and biculturalism. And for myself, I'm a child of a Japanese immigrant, and my father was born here and raised in Japan. So I guess in some ways I was cognizant that there's like the dominant culture and the other culture that was happening in my family. And the reason why is a lot of things I had to kind of interpret for my parents. So that was my job. And I was like the oldest child, the oldest daughter. And then my brother didn't come around for 8 years. So that was kind of my job. So I was very aware of that. But on the other hand, I mean, if this is your life, I mean, this is an American life. Even when we speak Japanese at home, to me, this is part of my American life. So I think when I seek to write, like I have a character, I know some of you know him, Masarai. You know, and one book club said, did you name him Arai because things go awry? But he's an aging gardener and Hiroshima survivor, and my father, you know, he fits that description. But he does not speak, it's a contemporary novel. They're set in the either late 20th or early 21st century, and it follows him from age like 69, 68, 69, and then the seventh and final novel, he's 86. But so Mas does not really have a mastered language. He does not speak English that well, he does not speak Japanese that well, but he has his own language. And this dialect, which I unabashedly put in my books, it's the most controversial aspect of that series, because people say I'm either being disrespectful, or else they say, Naomi, you've captured my, you know, grandfather, my uncle, my dad, my gardener, you know, so it's been very interesting to see that kind of reaction. And in my latest book, but those are more like cold case, like it's set in contemporary times, but there's something that happens in the past that needs to be solved. But Clark and Division, which is set, if you're from Chicago, you probably know that's an intersection in Chicago. It's set in 1944, so actually still during World War II. But Japanese Americans in the mass detention camps, they were starting to be released into the Midwest. So it kind of unravels that story. I look at a family, and it's told from a Nisei, a second generation woman, kind of like I'm kind of second generation with with somewhat immigrant parents. So in that sense, I share that experience with Aki, my main character. But what's kind of interesting, so there's Japanese words that appear, but what's interesting is like a New York librarian, she's from Japan, she was kind of like correcting my Japanese in my book, which I found really interesting. But there was one legitimate. What's hard is how do you Romanize certain words, and and also if you learn things idiomatic, like just by hearing, and there's a word called pachanko, like something flat, right? And I do know how to write Japanese, but I never wrote it because it's like, this is so pachanko, this is so flat. And I think I wrote it P-A, but the correct way is P-E. So she kind of called me on it. And then I was asking my friends, okay, how do you spell pachanko? They go P-A. I go, C, And I think that's like the Nisei, because it's not my native language, but something I heard, and that was my character. But I did correct it in the paperback edition. But there's other words, because I didn't want people who really knew Japanese to get tripped up, and it's like on the first page. So. But other phrases that it was like, these are Japanese American people. They're not from Japan, and they're not a wife is not gonna be speaking super polite to her husband when something tragic has happened, So it was just kind of in my mind when she called me out, and she wrote my editor this, but my editor goes, just take it with a grain of salt, take what you want. But I'm kind of glad this is even before the book was published, that she kind of called me on it, because in my mind, I started to sort out my decisions, so.
All right, now, for each of you as a writer, when you're deciding, obviously you want to keep the plot moving at a certain speed, but you also want to give at least a hint of the kind of manners, politeness, and some other things that might otherwise slow things down. How do you make decisions about moving the plot along versus giving people enough information that they're going to be able to get into the depth of the society and understand things that are going to happen later because of perhaps some problem with someone perceiving an insult or something similar? How do you deal with misunderstandings between characters when you're trying to write them for people who are from a different community?
Oh, I can answer to that. So when I'm writing a situation where it's a character from a certain culture, but I know that the book is going to be read by other people from other cultures and other, nationalities, I just take it for granted. I just assume that they know. I assume that the reader, so I never underestimate the reader. I always know that the reader is going to figure it out. But I do give little, very almost imperceptible hints, or by context, I sort of position the situation, the passage, or the dialogue, or whatever I'm writing, so that it will be understood, but I don't hit them over the head with it, in the sense that no footnotes, no nothing, just I know that the reader will figure it out. I just give them just enough, and it's a very delicate balance, in my view.
Bill, in some cases, you're dealing with aspects of Chinese spirituality, which I think the average reader probably doesn't know a great deal about. How do you deal with that situation of not only dealing with people who are in a somewhat historical context, as you mentioned? You're almost in a time travel book with time traveling by ghost.
That's true.
Wow.
One of the ways that I started this is that the the viewpoint character, the protagonist, is disengaged from his own heritage. And the book I mentioned a little while ago with the ghost stories is partly just a process of him learning about his heritage in the United States, as well as going all the way back to China. But there were a couple of reasons for that. One was, I figure if a guy's going to throw away his life and chase ghosts, he must be in a pretty bad way to start with. I don't think most of us would do that. So he is a guy who is isolated, lonely, and unhappy. But when he goes off on this adventure, he's discovering these things the same way the reader might be. And I might add, I'm from the Midwest. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. My father came to the United States as a child. My mother was born in China, but her parents had been in the United States before that. They spent 5 years overseas, and she happened to be born there. But I had a very, I don't know how to say it, a very uneven exposure to all of these things, because I'm a Midwestern boy. I have a father of Cantonese background. I have my mother's father, who came from Fujian province, and there can be big differences even among provinces. And one of the other things in this particular book is that, like me, the protagonist is Toisanese, an area in Guangdong province, a fairly small one, but most of the Chinese immigrants in the 1800s came from there. And so it gets cut even more finely because, he's talking about people who are Cantonese versus coming from the north, or people who are Toisanese versus people from the city of Guangzhou. And I had to find ways for him to discover the important parts of this, but in doing so, it would also convey that to the reader.
I think for myself, I write primarily mysteries. So I think that's an advantage because, people are always looking for clues. And our readers, mystery readers, are very curious. So I don't try to over-explain, and like Maria said, you have to kind of trust your readers. I know some people were saying, well, I wanted a glossary, in my first book. And one was a relative said this, because I think there's different type of readers. There are people who want the precise, rather than contextualized. So my relative had to talk to her, my uncle, her father-in-law, to find the precise meanings. But, and then he passed away, like not that long ago, after that encounter. So I was thinking, well, how wonderful you had this exchange, direct exchange. You needed the literal meaning, and you actually talked to someone. So I think that's really a beauty, that can come out of it. I think the biggest challenge that I had was actually with this latest book, Clark and Division, and my editor really took me to task on it because, I think she didn't understand this young woman, the trauma she was going through, yet it wasn't verbalized. And I think with a lot of Nisei women, and if you have looked at oral histories and heard, and often when I encounter other Japanese Americans, they said, nothing was spoken in the home. No one told me about this World War II experience. So how do you convey the true inner, trauma that's going in someone's life when it's not usually verbalized? So that was the tricky thing. And so, I think my earlier versions maybe glossed over, I'm just assuming, well, you all know that she's going through hell, right? Even though she doesn't say it out loud. And, a lot of people don't. So it's like, okay. So it was like just tricky things that I would, like when she encounters microaggressions or how she reacts, kind of trying to help the reader to kind of enter in to this young woman's life. And the book begins at her birth. So it was my way to kind of prepare the reader to fully, so you totally understand what this woman, has gone through since childhood, to understand how she reacts the way she does during World War II.
It strikes me that we have two people here who have done things that have a long story arc. Do you portray racism and the reactions of other cultures? Do you show over a long story arc how things may change, how people may be more sensitive later, or how different flashpoints of identity may come up?
I think with Clark and Division, I purposely made the narrator, it's not said, but I think I refer to this neighborhood called Tropical, which is actually in Atwater. That was the old name for that neighborhood near Glendale and Los Angeles. And I just had a throwaway line, like most people in Los Angeles don't know this place anymore. So it's like a hint that my narrator is a little bit removed from that World War II experience. But so there's like certain things like racial, like she would, in my follow-up, there's a lot of African Americans, she's going to call them black, whereas in the, in the dialogue, people said Negroes and that kind of term. So there's little, I chose to use a little bit of distance, not to explain like current, how things have changed, but just to kind of help the modern reader kind of ease into something that's from the past. So I don't know if that fully answered your question.
It takes things in a good direction. Have you written anything where you have a long story arc and you're trying to deliberately portray the way that social attitudes have changed?
Yes, a little bit in LA weather, because this family, even though they're Mexican, the mother is a Mexican Jew, Mexican Jews look exactly like Russian Jews or, any Ashkenazi Jew from anywhere in the world. So she's white, and the father, whose family lived in Mexico since before it was part of the United States, well, that means they had a Spanish heritage from Spain. So he's also, very light-skinned. So for any Latino, they're not brown enough to be Mexican. And so it's some sort of weird, they get relegated or left out, so they have to work extra hard to prove their Mexicanness.
They have to establish their authenticity to people in their own society.
They emphasized how Mexican they were because they wanted to belong to their own group, but because they didn't look like the majority of their peers, they struggle with that. And it's a thing that has to do with race.
Bill, I was going to ask you, sounds like from your own experience, have you ever had someone who was from the Chinese community who was deeply involved in it, who kind of gave you the fish eye saying your characters weren't Chinese enough or you weren't Chinese enough?
Not as a writer, sometimes just in life.
Oh. So they weren't reacting to your characters, but
to me,
your character,
yeah.
Yes.
Immigrants who think I should be fluent in some version of Chinese, although I remember also answering the door one day and I don't remember, I think it was a church group, but the two women were of Mexican descent, and they expected me to speak Spanish. When they saw me, they just decided I was one of them. So, difficult enough that I don't speak Chinese fluently, but actually, it's happened more than once. I kind of enjoy it, actually, because they feel, there's a positive feeling from that. But in Palmdale, I used to go to certain stores in certain neighborhoods. They'd speak Spanish to me when I walked in, and I would just smile nicely and speak English. But as far as the characters, I weave in a certain amount of this, I think, fairly often, but it's not always the main point of the story. So it's,
do you ever, I'd like to ask each of you as writers, do you ever have something where you have to sort of explicitly put into your writing where someone kind of shifts gears when they've been having a conversation in Spanish and then go immediately to a conversation in English, or a conversation in Japanese? Do you ever have that thing where somebody is having to to think about it? Is that an experience, and is that an experience that you have if you have been having a conversation in one language and have to shift to the other, where it takes you a moment to get your brain in gear?
Yeah, I would kind of be curious to you, because there's a debate on whether to use italicization with, I don't know how you guys handle it with, quote, you don't use it?
Yeah.
Pardon, italicization for what?
Well, quote,
For-
foreign words.
For foreign words, I just
Yeah.
said no more, I want it to flow, because more so in our current culture, Spanglish is a mix between English and Spanish. And so if you italized all the, words, I made sort of a decision in the novel where, one of the characters, who is the one who uses Spanish the most, she speaks English, but then curse words are in Spanish. And the reason for that is very natural, because when you're angry or something, you just instinctively switch into your native language. And so all the curse words that she ever said in the story are pretty much in Spanish.
Well, there's another reason for that. In my own family, my mother's parents would never teach the kids Polish because that meant they could swear and they could say things that they didn't want the kids to understand.
Oh.
So it's one of the reasons that some people lose language, is because the parents don't want you to learn the language, partly out of we're Americans, darn it, we're going to live in America, so I refuse to teach you your ancestral language, and partly for their own private language reasons.
Yeah, I'm still old school in that I do italicize my Japanese words that are not in the, Webster's dictionary. And I was going, wow, should I keep doing this or not? But I came to the decision that I think with the Japanese American experience, because the camp and incarceration, many people lost their language, and it was, encouraged, don't speak Japanese, And I'm kind of weird for my generation because my mother is actually from Japan, so I can speak it. So, I think there's a lot of people who are younger or my age too who don't know these Japanese words. So I just, I worked at a Japanese American newspaper and we did italicize some Japanese words, so I just kind of have kept up that tradition. But I'm going to see how I evolve. I might change with a future book. So, we'll kind of see. But I wanted to tell one funny story. My husband's here, and his grandmother, who died at age, 100 and something, 100? She was from Okinawa, and she lived in this neighborhood where there are a lot of Latinos, and I think she had a Dominican, renter. They lived in a fourplex or something. And then, so she picked up words. So, when I first met her, this is the matriarch, so I'm all excited. And when she was talking, I'm making out the Japanese words, and all of a sudden she's going, caliente, caliente, and I'm going, cari, she's speaking Spanish. So I think in Los Angeles, it's just like a mishmash, right? That's just kind of, it's become one language, all these different languages.
I'm working on a novel now that's Asian steampunk. It's set in Shanghai.
Oh, nice.
And the main character is still somebody like me. He has to go back to China because he hears that one of his cousins is in trouble and needs help. But I've had fun with language in this. There are people dealing with 3 different dialects of Chinese, but I also have British characters. So one will shift from an aristocratic British accent to Cockney when she feels like it. And I also have 2 characters dealing with German dialects. I know almost nothing about that. I had to do a lot of research with it. And there's also a Scottish character. And so I had fun with all different forms of English with this. I had to do a lot of homework. But it also was a way to bring out characters dealing with the question. They're all trying to figure out how to talk to each other. And for instance, the woman who speaks a couple of different social levels, I'll call them, of British English, is often making a judgment call. How should I talk to this person to get what I want out of them? Should I appear aristocratic, which her father was, but a lot of her father's associates and people she met were working people, sailors and so on. And I had fun also with just characters in Shanghai with so many different languages at that time. And sometimes it is unsolvable. They can't communicate with each other, and that is part of the story.
Speaking of communication, this brings up another question for writers, which is sometimes you, as writing about people who are bilingual or multilingual, you might have to write about someone who is highly intelligent but doesn't know the rules of the language very well or doesn't have a large vocabulary. Have you ever had that situation? And if so, how do you deal with it? Where you have to have a situation, because people think of someone with poor grammar as being dumb. No, maybe it's just you're not from here and you have a different grammar and you haven't integrated our rules yet.
Well, that's basically my character Masarai, and I write that a close third person, so you get a lot of his internal thoughts. So you could see this is not a dumb person at all, you know. And I think that series, I was fighting against the whole, you know, some people assume like, oh, if someone has a really strong accent or broken English, you know, they're not very intelligent. So, you know, that whole character was kind of fighting back against that belief or stereotype.
Probably this is an anecdote of my own life, but I'm putting it into a memoir that is not out yet. But it illustrates this. When I was 13 years old, I was sent to live in a pig farm in Minnesota. I didn't speak a word of English, and I was there for a year. I did 7th grade. And I learned English. I learned very fast. I was very young. I was 13 years old, so I picked up the language very fast. And when I went back to Mexico, I said, I've mastered the language. So flash forward, you know, I'm 23. I finished college. I immigrate to Los Angeles, and I'm thinking, I speak amazing English, right? Of course, the English of a 13-year-old is very different. So,
and a 13-year-old on a pig farm, you probably know all the different words that no one will ever ask you about the different parts of a pig.
Yeah, exactly. And I would, you know, when I first got there, I would point to the wallpaper in the kitchen, and the lady of the house would say, you know, tomato, banana, so I, you know, didn't starve. But when I finally came to America, I realized I need to improve my vocabulary. I you know, got by really well at 13, saying cool, neat, weird, gross, you know, those were kind of my words. And
some things that are real cute when you're 13 aren't when you're not 13, yes.
I know, so I was like, how am I gonna, you know, I need to relearn adult English, you know. So it's interesting story because it really pushed me forward too.
Yes, I actually know someone who is highly intelligent and was proud of his Spanish because of the fact that he had communicated so well with construction workers at a construction job that he had. And then he was speaking to some people who were from a cultured family, and they were kind of thinking, did this guy learn his Spanish in jail? What is this? It's like, it's construction worker Spanish. That's what that's
Yes.
like, yes. How do you indicate class? Do you have ways that you indicate class in another society to a reader?
Well, what I was talking about with dialects does a lot of that in what I was doing. And I was also thinking in the ways people communicate. Of course, there are a lot of nonverbal ways. And in my story set in Shanghai, one of the things I've just made reference to here and there is that a British bow, a Chinese bow, and a Japanese bow are all different. And how you do that, you know, you can see someone at a distance. And some culture is communicated just visually by seeing how someone responds to another person.
Well, how does a writer put in something that is that visual? Because you're not writing a film script. How do you indicate, okay, this person gave an insultingly shallow bow? Or is that the kind of thing you
might
would
have
say?
to say it, yeah.
Might have to just say it, okay.
And of course, you can
Fascinating.
also have that in dialogue among characters. So one person passing judgment on someone else.
I seem to remember in one of the Moss books, he purposely makes the decision to speak English to like a higher class person from Japan, because he wants to be on a more equal playing field, you know, and he knows the other person can't speak English that well. So there's a lot of different points, especially in the Moss book, because he realizes his English skills are not that strong, her language skills in general are not that strong. So he makes decisions, to go around it, So.
Now, I know, Maria, that you're the only person here on this panel who actually emigrated to Los Angeles and thereby has a understanding of Los Angeles that starts later in life when you already are aware of different things. But for all of you, you all are giving portraits of different Los Angeleses. What are some of the things that you have written? I don't know how much of your work is really set in LA, Bill, but insofar as you're writing about Los Angeles, what's the Los Angeles that people will see through your writing that they won't see otherwise?
Oh, yeah. Well, I wanted to share this vision I have of Los Angeles as the bunny slipper city, one size fits all, in the sense that, you can really have an array of lives. You can tailor-make your life to your liking. And I realized this when I went to live in New York. I lived in New York for 4 years recently. And when you live in New York, you sign a contract with New York. You have to walk at a certain pace. You have to live in an apartment of a certain square footage. You have to, you have to adapt to the city. Los Angeles, the city adapts to you. And so I wanted to have this sort of very diverse, varied, free kind of playground or space where people can actually dream a life of their liking and aim for it. Some accomplish it, some don't, but you can actually have that vision. And I wanted to do that.
And you wanted to portray that in your writing. You're writing in some cases about a trucking company, which I think I would say to an average reader, we've never read anything set in a trucking company. There's probably a lot of trucker slang and things that you have to drop in.
Yes.
But is there anything about driving around Los Angeles and trying to get a big truck through a small alley? And I mean, is there any part of Los Angeles that is an underbelly or an ethnic enclave that we're going to see through a trucking company run by a Mexican family?
Yes, the well, San Pedro is featured there, of course.
We have noticed that a little bit, yes.
Actually. Yes, this father-daughter trucking team who, move heavy construction equipment all over the country, and they load up in LA because this is a huge port, and from here they go everywhere else. And so there's the docks, the yard, and what was really fascinating is because I didn't know anything about trucking, so I went along with truckers in their trucks for a year. Wherever they wanted to go, I just traveled with them. And I just went along. I didn't bring a recorder or a camera or notebook because I just wanted to experience it. And I learned, like the CB lingo is incredible. And I learned all these words that they use, like a piece of tire on the pavement is called an alligator. A police car is a bear. A police helicopter is a bear in the air. A motorcycle is a crotch rocket.
Well, I was thinking of, are there, for instance, competitions between Mexican truck drivers, between different companies or different families that would be something that we wouldn't know about? I'd ask the same thing of Naomi, in the sense of, are there competitions between you have a gardener, you know, a Japanese gardener was almost a stereotype it was a stereotype in the United States of, you know, the best gardeners being Japanese, but is there anything that a trucker or a gardener, is this a side of Los Angeles that in your novel you're illuminating something?
Yeah, and just real quick, because I don't want to take over, but I wrote the English version of the book, and then I did my own translation. I do that. I write my own translations. And so the whole lingo thing, the whole trucker lingo is completely different. So I had to travel with Spanish-speaking truckers and with English-speaking truckers and learn two lingos, two completely different languages that they speak among themselves. And in the CB, they have different channels. So you have the Spanish channel, the English channel. So it was fascinating. And that's like a third language that I handled in the book.
When you're filling out applications now, you can say Spanish, English, and trucker?
Yep.
That's useful. Naomi, anything that did you research Japanese gardeners before writing your Japanese gardener?
Well, you know, my dad was in that occupation.
Oh,
that was
well,
part of the
that probably
social
helped.
network. I will say this, that there was such a halo effect. Like if you're this was probably in the 60s and some. If you were Japanese, you know, you knew how to garden, and it didn't even matter if you like tore up, you know, a hedge or a tree. They still thought you were really good at gardening. So, and that's kind of a part of Stinky, one of Moss's friends, is not very good at gardening, but he's still gainfully employed.
Bill, as I remember, one of the things from reading Chinese history was there was just an assumption going back into the Old West of, oh, they're Chinese, they'll be a good cook, and they can make something edible out of anything. Are there any stereotypes like that, positive or negative, that you've worked into your writing?
Well, I haven't done very much with that specifically, but I do have a reference to the LA question that you had.
Yeah.
Again, this is an adventure in a temple of forgotten spirits, but it's about Hollywood. The main character now has a girlfriend, and they hitchhike onto Hollywood Boulevard and have no idea why they're there, but they're following a supernatural creature who's led them there. But what I dealt with has to do with the character of Charlie Chan. The movie character, of course, was based on a character in 4 novels, and very loosely, not very accurately, based on a real detective in Hawaii. And he was a lean and tough, but respected and award-winning detective. But the character of Charlie Chan, of course, is overweight and spends a lot of time saying nice things to people and bowing and being very deferential. And so my characters here meet a woman who really is thinking about this, wishes she could see a movie with the original. And I won't go through the whole process of the story, but at the end, she has died, and her ghost is in an empty theater watching a version of a Charlie Chan movie with the real detective and somebody who looks like him.
I should mention one thing that didn't come up earlier, which is, as I remember, Bill, you wrote a book, you co-authored a book called The Yellow Peril, about historical, how Asian Americans were portrayed in literature in American history. Is that correct?
Yeah, this was not co-authored, just me. It was a version of my doctoral dissertation. It's called The Yellow Peril, Chinese Americans in American Fiction, from 1850 to 1940. And if I had known how much there was, I would have narrowed the scope. It was too much work. But I was always interested in how all of us, Asian Americans and other non-whites, have been portrayed, movies, novels, books, and going, of course, to the stereotypes we talk about. And I did draw from some of this in my fiction also, learning about the history and some of the other literature. But that was, in a way, it was a separate interest that converged with my writing over time.
Yeah.
Because you wrote that, I can ask a question. I'm going to ask all of you this, knowing that Bill has a head start because he wrote a doctoral dissertation on it. But what is one of the early characters that you remember where someone of your ethnicity, someone who looked, talked like you, was treated with respect and as an intelligent leading character rather than the butler, the servant, the gardener? So Bill first, because so everybody else has time to think. What's the earliest Chinese character you can think of in American fiction who was treated as someone who was dynamic, intelligent, and who moved the plot along?
Well, I remember him. I'm sorry to say I don't remember the name of the book anymore. It's been too long. But there's another reference. This is not prose fiction. It was an episode of the old TV show The Rifleman that had a line that made me laugh out loud. A Chinese immigrant and his American-born son come through. They come to town. They're driving a wagon, and they do laundry for whoever they can. There are some hostile people in the storyline who attack them at night and tear up all the laundry, and they're beating the immigrant character. And when the hero shows up, one of the bad guys says, "This is none of your business." And the rifleman says, "That's my laundry." And I don't know who came up with that line, but I've laughed about that ever since. But they were depicted as regular people, and they were not looked down upon in the storyline.
Naomi, could you, going back into there in the 1930s, in the 1930s,
I wasn't alive then.
I know, you have an excuse here. I was going to just give as an example, in the 1930s, there were numerous examples in American popular fiction of Japanese butlers because they were notoriously polite, and it was a status symbol to have for a white family to have a Japanese butler or gardener. And I do seem to remember reading some things that were almost like the equivalent of Jeeves, where you have the very intelligent butler who is basically cleaning up the messes of their much dumber boss. And that's the earliest I could remember of a Japanese character who is very positive, although very, very subtle.
Because I'm old, it's harder to read. The thing that excites me, if you talk to a younger person, they could come up with a lot more examples from their childhood than me. But one thing that I guess, remember the courtship of Eddie's father? Yeah. Mrs. Livingston, and she actually won an Oscar for being in Sayonara. What was her name again? Umeki? Oh, Miyoshi Umeki. She was just like the kind, you knew nothing about this woman's background, and she had a heavy accent, but she was very sweet. And I liked her just because I just assumed she was probably Japanese. I knew the actress was. So it's funny, it's kind of sad, that for me as a young person, like that just fleeting character, I didn't know anything about her, would be someone I would have at least, a positive viewpoint. But but I think she may be the only Asian woman to have won an Academy Award. I believe so, actress, yeah. So, and that was we haven't come that far, unfortunately, but I do think there's more, like on Netflix, right? There's a lot of positive Asian American, characters, which is great.
Marie, any characters that you remember that when you first read them, you went, hey, here's somebody showing respect for my culture? Actually, since you grew up in Mexico, you don't have the childhood reaction probably that everybody else would.
No. No, but I do have, when you were speaking about the cliches, that the Japanese gardener and all that, in this novel, I have a nanny. In this one, I have a nanny because one of the sisters, she's an architect and she's going to all the construction sites, and she has a set of toddler twins. And so she needs help. She needs somebody who will take care of her babies while she's working. So I have a nanny. And my editor's like, no, you can't have a nanny. in the book. I said, why not? Because that's colonialism, that's not good for, you know, the image of the Latinos. And I said, well, you know, it's a good paying job. And, you know, by these two women working together is putting two Latina women in the workforce. I mean, you know, it's good. And so she went to the head editor complaining that I didn't want to get rid of the nanny. And she went to the head editor, can you believe it? She has a nanny in the book. And the head editor said, well, I have a nanny. So that was the end.
And she's Latina?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's Latina. So that was the end of the whole discussion. But
That brings up something else, which is, have any of you ever had any pushback from your community? Because I presume that since each of you is writing in that community where there are heroes, villains, unscrupulous people, has anybody ever said, you know, you've got this villain character who's Japanese in here, you've got this character in this book who's a drunk or who has some other kind of vice? Has anyone ever tried to get you to, you know, clean up anyone from your ethnic community ever tried to get you to say, well, you're showing our community in a bad light by including that particular character?
With my first book, an elder said, Naomi, you're like showing our dirty laundry. And it was only about gambling. And anyone who's hung around, you know, guys of a certain age, there's going to be gambling in there. And so I thought that was hilarious.
well, you gotta have conflict in your stories.
Yeah. Well, it's reality
If
too.
everything is beautiful, what's the story? Yeah.
But I think, again, because I write mysteries, it's like it's a given there's going to be a dead body, and it's a given there's going to be suspects. So I think built into the genre is that expectation. So I think I get a pass a little bit, like, okay, she's a mystery writer. It's just part of the game.
Bill, any negative reactions from anyone in the Chinese community who said, you have a Chinese villain, why don't you make the white people the villains?
I don't remember a reaction like that. But there may be something similar, since I'm writing in science fiction and fantasy genres. They're not our normal, everyday, mainstream, so to speak, world. And so there may be some extra margin they'll give me too.
Is there anything that is easier for you in the sense that in science fiction and fantasy, unlike in mystery, for instance, yes, mystery, people know there's going to be a dead body. When someone opens the first page of a science fiction book, there could be anything there. Does the more free-form nature of science fiction, where people don't know what kind of story they're reading, free you up as a writer to just do anything and have your characters be anybody?
Well, I guess I don't know, because I haven't written in other genres. I don't know
That's fair, yes.
how to make the comparison. That's what I've been doing. So.
And Maria, in your work, is there an element of a predictable story arc, would you say, in the sense of mysteries tend to have a predictable story arc in which the mystery probably is not going to be solved 30 pages before the end, or something similar? In your writing, is there something where, you know, in contemporary fiction, I've heard that almost every story is to some degree a mystery, because you're setting up set of things that are coming together. But do you find that kind of an arc as being something that you can predict?
It depends on the narrative, depends on the structure of the story. For instance, my first novel was a quest. Here you have this woman who is, you know, fragile, and she sets out to look for her daughter and has to go through all the bogs and the marsh and find the daughter. So it's a quest. And so there is this narrative, this structure. The second book, the trucker story, is a road story. It's a road story, so it definitely has the feel of a road story, you know, getting from point A to point B with all the obstacles and everything that happens along the way. And the third one is a family story. So you have several characters where they interact with one another. stuff happens, basically you get them into trouble and then you get them out of trouble, and and that's kind of the sort of the narrative of this kind of story. So it depends on the story.
And Naomi, did I characterize that correctly? Have you ever written a book without a body in there somewhere, or is that just a?
You mean a dead body?
A dead body, yes.
Yeah. I have. I mean, I've written a middle grade book, and there was there was mysteries, but not that kind of mystery. It wasn't a crime novel. Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the audience for a few questions right now. Do you have one, sir?
Bill, I'm going to be real surprised if you tell me that Blade Runner isn't one of your favorite movies.
And the question was, Bill, is Blade Runner one of your favorite movies?
I don't know if I'd call it a favorite, but it's very good.
What is your favorite science fiction movie?
At this moment, I'm not sure I really have one, but the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers comes to mind. I like that a great deal.
All right. Anyone else from out there? Yes.
You mentioned the mother was a Mexican Jew, but you also said she was Ashkenazi, so she's not Sephardic.
No, she's not.
Question is, the mother in the story is a Mexican Jew, but she's Ashkenazic rather than Sephardic.
Right. Her ancestors arrived in Mexico during the war, and they came from Poland.
Okay, because my husband's family is Sephardic Jew.
Oh, okay. All right.
They spoke Ladino rather than Yiddish.
Yeah, my husband's family is the Jewish, come from France, so also Ashkenazis.
Yeah, just as an aside, both in the period of Italian unification and in the period of German unification, there were a lot of Jews and Catholics who, when there were basically wars between the many states that were Catholic and Protestant, some people were in the middle of this and just got out, and many of them came to America, but also many of them went to Mexico. So there were tens of thousands of Germans, both Jewish and Catholic, who went to Mexico because of the fact that at the time, in the 1870s, Mexico was avowedly anti-clerical. It was a place where Catholics would feel comfortable, but where there was no persecution, and it was a place that was easier to get into in some ways than the United States. So you do have a Jewish community in Mexico that surprisingly is from Northern Europe. So, let's see, anyone else?
I apologize for being late, first of all, and maybe you covered this. But when you begin to write your stories, do you already know what the ending is?
The question is, when you begin to write the stories, do you know the ending? Or do you maybe start with an idea and see where it goes?
I don't, and I write mysteries, so I don't know who did it. Usually I don't know until like 3/4.
You write mysteries where you don't know who did it?
Yeah. And I think that kind of helps because I'm not like leading, like it's a discovery for me. And then I might have to tweak things going back, but yeah.
That is so cool. I never know. It sort of reveals itself as I go.
When I started out, I didn't know the ending. Nowadays, I do a lot more outlining. The way I think of my stories is that the story is really about the ending. It's the protagonist's resolution. So I do think about that a lot.
I was thinking, I know we have at least one English teacher in the audience who is sitting here who is probably having students outline things and is hearing 3 popular writers say that they don't necessarily work from that, or at least they didn't start that way. So it's a kind of an interesting thing to hear. I'm very surprised given all of the writing classes that tell you to outline everything.
You know, but I think inherently we know what the beats that we need to hit. You know, it's more of an organic process though. It's just like learning music, you know, you're learning, you know, the melody and whatever, you know, when you're young. And I think by reading, we're kind of absorbing the way the story needs to go. So I think there is some kind of outline that's probably subconscious in our mind, but it may not be, we don't have to physically write it out.
I do write it out, but of course that's a form of writing also. It's, I think I started my so-called outlines just because there was something I didn't want to forget, so I wrote it down. And then I wrote down something else, and that implied something else, and it just gets bigger.
And it just happened.
In my case, I never went to writing school. I'm pretty much self-taught. I learned to write by reading, and so I don't have a lot of that schooling that a lot of colleagues have. So I had resorted to other ways of outlining. For instance, the first novel that I wrote, Esperanza's Box of Saints, I was really struggling with my English, but I really wanted to write it in English because I wanted to learn more vocabulary. And the dialogue was terrible. And so I set it aside and I said, I'm gonna do a dialogue exercise. I'm gonna write a screenplay. And I wrote the screenplay of that novel that was still in the works. I wrote the screenplay, and then I literally copy-paste the whole thing into the document, and I already had, because when I wrote the script, I sort of gave myself permission to write a more colloquial dialogue because it was a script. So that's what I did. And it worked out. It was a nice exercise because it did give me the skeleton of the novel. Once I had the script transferred over to a Word document, you know, and this is all like stuff behind the scenes, but this is how I had like the whole story, and I used pretty much all the dialogue that I used that I wrote in the script. I used it in the novel.
Huh. All right, any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Well, since we're talking about outlining and that kind of stuff, how do you organize like all of these different elements that are happening in your books? If we're not talking about outlining, and I don't believe in outlining at the beginning anyways, but as you're in process, how do you keep that, like just the sprawling nature of writing like that, organized?
And the question is about how you keep a sprawling novel organized.
Well, I don't want this to sound like a joke. It might, but I don't think it is organized. There is, at this stage, just as much free association as there is when I'm writing the first draft of the text. I mean, this kind of is the first draft of the text, but it is usually, for me, again, stuff I don't want to forget. And at a certain point, it usually takes a certain form. As you were saying, a lot of this is internalized. And so over time, the order of events and what the main characters want to do with it just sort of takes shape.
Because I'm starting to do more historicals, I use Evernote, you know, and so and it's an easy way to drop in photos. I rely on a lot of photography, you know, interviews, so I have all these different notebooks. I like Evernote because it could be on my phone, it could be, you know, on my computer, so that's like a good way. And occasionally I'll even write a scene and just stick it in there too. I do notice that when it comes to the character arc, that sometimes certain scenes come to me and I'll just write it out of sequence, and then I'll just come in later on.
Yeah, something I did in my third novel, in LA Weather, because the novel is structured like a calendar year. Every chapter is a month, January to December, and they're called like that, January, February. Because I follow the actual weather of 2016, and every weather event is real. It did happen, so if I have an entry on February 3rd and it rained, I write it rained. I include it in the story. And what I did is I went to Staples and got this huge calendar, you know, the kind that you put on the wall, paper calendar, and then I got all these Sharpies with different colors. And so every character had a different color, so they were all color-coded. So I would write, what did this character do on this day? And I just wrote, like, you know, just a sentence to remind myself. So very visually, I could see at the end of the month, oh my gosh, I haven't talked about this character, you know? So I integrated the character into the story. And then I had, you know, like I would tear off the page and tape it to to the window, and I had my whole room with the 12 months, and I could really see at a glance every character story and how they interacted and everything that happened every day. So that was very helpful.
That is a fascinating writing pattern. I have not heard of anybody doing things quite like that.
Color coding is helpful if you have multiple characters, like
Yeah.
like certain areas, like, oh, I don't have yellow.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I got to fill that. What's going on with that character? Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't forget the character,
Yeah,
right? It's like,
yeah.
oh, I haven't talked about this character. I don't see any yellow here.
All right.
You're more organized than I am. I just kind of bumble along.
Well, you're creating. You could just create things out of yeah. Yeah.
That's the beauty of
Yeah.
sci-fi.
Yeah.
All right, and let's see, we have time for one more, if we have one more out there. Ah, yes.
I guess for William, since you write in science fiction, have you ever created another language or created words to describe things that otherwise don't exist in our world?
For William, about inventing languages when he's already writing across several of them.
I think the answer is no, I haven't.
But this has inspired you to, right?
So you've never even had to have some machine might exist in your science fiction world, but you have to come up with a name for it, nothing like that.
Well, I suppose there are names, and I think I've added individual words here and there to refer to something that doesn't exist. But I know science fiction writers who have, in fact, created entire languages, and I haven't done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some, the science fiction writer who I think wins any award for being obsessive about language was a Thai science fiction writer named Samtao Sukaretkul, who taught himself Cherokee, because so he is the world's only Cherokee to Thai translator.
Wow.
So if you ever need one, that's probably who you should call. But he got so interested in the structure of the language because he had to include a Cherokee character that he really
That's
went
so
very
cool.
a deep dive into the language. All right. Now, just before we adjourn here, and the authors will two of the authors will have some books for sale and signing, I'd like to see if any of you have any final thoughts on writing multicultural characters, the rewards of doing it, the challenges, just anything you'd like to add, any question that nobody asked that you wish somebody should.
I just have a little comment.
Yeah.
I guess when you are multicultural or bicultural, it comes natural. So it's sort of easy, right? In the sense that it's sort of second nature.
I
That's
think
how-
it's true. I don't think about it. I think about details, of course, but I don't think about it in a large sense.
Yeah, I think for me, probably working at a Japanese American newspaper was helpful because I did a deep dive on my community here in Los Angeles and just an embrace of people from Japan that are here as well as third, fourth generation. I think it could be tricky if people are kind of unaware or maybe they've kind of been told, like, don't write about these things. Well, I've been told this, like, don't, write about white people because that sells. Don't write about your experience. But those people don't know anything about publishing. So.
That's really changed these days.
Yeah, and it's totally, it's flipped.
All right, Bill, any final thoughts? Or
Well, nothing's really coming to me except that I have been, I don't know what the word is, I've taken a lot of satisfaction from writing about ethnic subjects.
And Maria, any thoughts?
Same thing. I first words out of my mouth today were, I can't help it, and it's true. I can't help writing about my own experience and just sharing it through characters.
So it's rewarding to you to do that and have people know that people are going to read it and have greater empathy for your community. I
Yep.
see some heads nodding, so
Yep.
probably. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. This program was sponsored by the Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs and The Big Read, and we hope that you will learn more about these authors by their books. We have a bookseller here who can arrange for you to get the books. For those of you in live stream land, you can get them from her. We will post that on the website. I believe she can get them signed. Thank you all very much for your time, and we hope that you do come to Collage again and investigate the other offerings that we're doing here. Collage is a California 501c3 nonprofit that has a wide variety of different programs, including literature, poetry, and music. Yes, sir, you were?
I did open up next door,
Ah.
in case anybody wants to walk through, as
So-
well as the lobby area.
Thank you very much for your time, everyone. Have a great day.